So the idea is I'm going to go through and give you a quick overview of some of the data analytics options available to you in Google Workspace. If we've got time, we can look at some case studies on some really big customers, like Ministry of Education scale, some examples of how they're making use of it, and then make sure we leave some time for Q&A. As we go through, I'm also going to call out some specifics with some demos on watch points that we see some organizations struggle with, particularly around like configuring Google Cloud Platform the first time you're getting set up, and also like billing watches and points to go through and configure there as well. But I recognize many people on the call, but I'm Oli. I'm a solutions engineer on the EMEA team. So I basically have a role to support our biggest kind of institutions with configuring Google Workspace and Chrome, and support wonderful partners like AppsEDU with any kind of technical solutions as and when they need it, which they don't often. They're very proficient. So a big call out to Peter and Dan and Katya and the team. But I'll start off with giving a quick overview of some data journeys that we typically see. And so here at Google, we like to consider these in a crawl, walk, run perspective when it comes to getting started with analytics. So quite often, like a big group of schools might come to us, or indeed a country, and say, hey, we need analytics. We need to know what's happening, but don't actually really know what that means or what they're going to do with it. And I see some people on the call who I know are doing some really clever stuff with analytics. And so this won't apply to all of you, but I would urge you that when you're going through and thinking about a analytics strategy, think about like, what is the endpoint? What would you like to get to? And why do you want to analyze this data? And importantly, what are the insights and actions that you want to take from it? Because the insights and actions will help you guide the data required, what your data lake might look like, and make sure you're only really kind of consuming and iterating with relevant data. Because if you're going to end up with gigabytes or terabytes worth of data, there is obviously a storage cost to all of this, and you don't want to be wasting money having a heap of data that's actually irrelevant or useless to what you might need. So what we typically see is this journey where someone will start off just by looking at general workspace EDU and usage data, and then go through, and we've got a load of templates that we can share to help you get started this. So we recommend that maybe starting here is a good place. What we then see is once you have all this data being exported from Workspace, for example, or Chrome, combining that with other sources of data like grades from an SIS system or an LMS system, attendance data, well-being, even cross-referencing that with things like weather data to validate your hypothesis that if it's a windy day, the kids are going to be a bit wilder in the classroom, and validating that and maybe using that to take some actions looking at weather forecasting in the future. And then also thinking about what this might look like even once you've got all that data. So what are the insights, any proactive predictions that you might see? And we do lots of work across the globe with external consultants to go through and utilize some of this data, plus additional data that like a ministry might have to do really clever kind of predictive analytics. And then obviously from there, we have like a fly, which is where you're taking proactive like interventions. So based on the predictions, if a student in grade 7, for example, has certain flags that might predict them to underperform when they get to grade 11, as an example, what are the relevant interventions that have been seen to work well in historic cases that you could then implement on this year 7 student to give them the best chance in year 11, as an example. So we have a number of data available to you, and we're really aware that in Google Workspace, we are probably just a snapshot of all of the data and services that you go through and interact with. So we provide a couple of solutions to make it as easy as possible for you to get this data into a service of your choice. You can then do things like joining that and cross-referencing that with other sources of data that you might find useful. But we've also tried to make it as simple as possible if you're just interested in Google Workspace and Chrome data, to make it really easy to analyze that with some out-of-the-box template dashboards that you can go through and visualize. And I'll share some of these with you towards the end of this session as well. So we've got app utilization, device usage, classroom adoption and usage, all of the security, the audit log events, and we've also got support for read along now. So Read Along is obviously our like literacy tutor application, and we've done a lot of work on the back end working with the Read Along team to make sure that relevant logs are being piped into the investigation tool Flume, and as a result can be read by the API and the BigQuery export to help you if you're looking at a large-scale literacy program for younger students or English as a second language, to get some really nice proactive data on that as well. So there's lots of things that you can do. So I assume that most people on this call have access to the admin console. And so within there, you've got loads of activity data that you can access via the investigation tool and the audit tool that you're probably quite familiar with. And so basically anything that's available in the investigation tool, we can also go through and pipe out into BigQuery, as we'll see later. And then what's nice is we also provide a number of Looker Studio dashboards that you can then make a template copy of and then go and iterate that how you wish as well. We also provide in the admin console a number of like aggregated metrics that you're quite familiar with to just help you get started as well. So in the audit logs, which I think you're familiar with, you can go through and see really specific elements of what's happening there as well. I assume everybody's quite comfortable with the investigation tool and what's available. From a device usage, we provide information such as which channels the devices are on. There is also some additional telemetry that many people don't enable, and I'll go through and show where this is in the admin console, which includes lots of really detailed stuff like login and log off time. So we have, a few years ago, you could only get pretty rudimentary insights into which users had accessed a Chrome device, but you were never really able to like cross-reference that to specific login or logout events. All of that is possible now as well. You also have the ability to actually go through and see what type of devices are being used by users when they're accessing Google Workspace, which is quite useful and gives you an insight into the types of devices that students might be accessing Classroom at from home, for example. So are they over-indexing into their Android device rather their one-to-one Chrome device? All of that information can be provided to you as well. And then we have really robust detailed classroom activity dashboards that you can go through and tick into, which is great for looking at things like workloads for students and teachers, engagements as well. We've now got support for Gemini in Classroom on those as well. And then read along activity as well, which is pretty brand new, but really useful, more so at a country level probably than like an individual school, but pretty useful ways to understand the comprehension, how much assistance was needed for each student, for each book, etc. How many books have been finished, reading levels of students. And then so this outlines a couple of what we call stakeholders who might be interested in the analytics journey. So for an IT admin, you might be interested in engagement. As a CISO, you might want to look at the security posture. Whereas if you're a teacher or a teaching and learning leader, you might be more interested in the day-to-day kind of workload, the types of stuff and how students interacting with things like Google Classroom and their assignments. And there are a couple of ways to go through and do this. So obviously in the admin console, we have these pre-built reports that are made available to you. We often find though that once you really want to dig into this, they're not quite sufficient to do what you need if you want some specific analysis or workflows that you want to build out. In addition to the admin console, there's also some analytics that are provided at the teacher and the education leader level within Google Classroom. So I think probably, Peter, you've covered this in a previous session, I'm sure, where you looked at the Classroom analytics features available there as well. So if the admin console proves not sufficient, we also go through and make the reports API available. So anybody can make use of the reports API, and they can create scheduled tasks, for example, that go through and regularly query our API via the admin reports endpoint, and can pull out all sorts of data. Basically anything that's available in the investigation tool, you can go through and access. But then if you have Education Standard or Education Plus, we have a piping connector that's really easy to go through and configure. And I'll go through that flow in just a moment on how you do this in your admin console, where you basically create a BigQuery project and it will then go through and automatically feed a couple of tables or 3 tables with activity data, usage data, and fairly recently we've added a drive inventory report as well. So it's a regular snapshot of all of your drive inventory into a BigQuery project. So I'll very quickly show you how you go through and configure this. Maybe a quick thumbs up if you have configured a BigQuery report in your console, or thumbs down if you have not yet. And that might give us an idea of how many of you are already using this. Lots of thumbs up and a few thumbs down as well. Okay, so it's worth me going through and showing this very quickly. So in the admin console, in the reporting section, if you have education standard or plus, you'll need to make sure the license is assigned to you as an admin. You'll see this BigQuery export feature here. And you simply go through, and you'll need to go through and enable this. So we have two options. One is the BigQuery export, and this is for the activity and the usage logs that you see in your console. And then there is also the drive inventory report as well. We typically recommend you put these in the same project and the same data set, just from a ease of management and billing perspective as well. So before you go through and do this, you actually have to go into Google Cloud Console. And so if you've never accessed the Google Cloud Console before, firstly, you'll need to make sure that the GCP service is enabled for at least you, the super admin who wants to go through and configure this. So you'll need to go through and choose Google Cloud Platform over here and make sure that this service is enabled for certain users. That is a blocker that we sometimes see. You might also see that you don't have the ability to go through and create new products. So I've obviously got a number of projects here in my console. This is the one that I'm working on. If you go through and you click new project and you get an error message that you are not able to create the project, this is something that I strongly recommend you do anyway. But you should have access, as you're a super admin on your workspace tenant, you should have an overall organization admin of your domain. So my domain here is called Demo Workspace. Yours will be your primary domain of your Google Workspace tenant. If you aren't able to create a project, which is likely for many users in the first time, I would recommend selecting the overall project, so selecting the organization rather than individual project. And then in the left-hand side, we have an IAM and admin section. And you will need to go through and grant yourself owner permissions of the organization. Now, Peter is very familiar with BigQuery, and I guess he would be willing to support if you run into any of these problems. Pete, I'm nominating you here. But it's pretty simple to go through and configure. You click on the IAM, make sure you've selected the organization, and just make sure that you grant access to yourself. So I can go through and choose a random user, and just make sure that you choose the owner permission. And that is a kind of catch-all permission that will give you access to create projects and manage projects across the organization. I see there is a new question in Q&A.
Yes, it says, hi Ollie, has the schema previously had limited fields? Has it been extended for usage table? Or, for example, could only get file size via GAM?
Cool. So really great question. The drive inventory report is probably going to do exactly what you want, and I'll go through and show you that in just a minute as to how that looks, rather than just using the general usage elements there. So yes, it has, and we'll go through. So once you've got that set up, you should then be able to go through, create a project. It's pretty simple. Once you've created the project, you just head back into your BigQuery export, and then make sure you go through. The project should be automatically created for you, and you should be able to go through and select it and then give your data a name. Hopefully that's pretty easy to understand. Once you have got that, you will then be able to create a project. I've got one open for me here, and then I can go into the BigQuery Studio, and this gives me the ability to go through and inspect and analyze my data. Now, the first thing to be aware of is that when you turn this on for the first time, it's going to take up to 72 hours for you to get any data appearing into your activity tables. One other thing to be aware of is that this uses a process called data streaming, which is not included in the free sandbox GCP billing query. So Peter may have talked about this before, but what's really important is if you want to go through and get live streamed data, you will need to create a billing account on GCP. Now there is some pricing available, and there's some pricing calculators. There is a really favorable free tier of BigQuery usage, and it's likely that most schools or even big groups of schools won't incur any of the actual billable data usage of BigQuery. But I would strongly recommend that if it's a concern, maybe go through and work with Peter and the team here at AppsEDU to see whether you can go through and explore the pricing calculator, get some estimates. But it's really the first like 10 gigabytes of storage and queries each month is free. So it's unlikely that you're going to incur any cost. Even if it does start creeping over that quantity, the query costs are really low. And so it's likely you're looking in the single unit dollars rather than 1,000 unit dollars per month for some of this billing. But I just wanted to make you really clear that you can set this up on a free BigQuery project with no billing, but you will just get a single one-time dump of all of your activity usage and drive inventory data. If you want this to be regularly piped, you'll need to enable billing to enable the streaming to come through. Does that make sense? Peter, have I missed anything around that? Hopefully that was clear.
No, I think that's a really good overview. And yeah, BigQuery, something I always encourage our customers to turn on, even if you don't think you need it straight away. It's been numerous cases where it's been useful to go back in time and find out when something changed or when someone did something, or getting kind of that archive analytics data as well.
Agreed. And so there are 3 tables that are created. So an activity table, a usage table, and then a drive inventory table. And if you click on these, if you're familiar with SQL, if you love writing SQL queries, then this is going to be your playground, because you can then go through and create your own custom queries and build them here and investigate your data through standard SQL processes. But you'll see that when you look at the overall schema here, you can see all of the information that's going to be exported from your activity tables. So anything that's available in the investigation tool, you'll see available here in the schema. And you can go through and preview your tables if you wish. And you'll see that I've obviously got heaps of stuff here. You can filter these. So a lot of these are around meet record types. You can go through and explore your tables and get some insights on here as well. You can also see information about the details. What I love about this is it's really useful for admins to keep their data and investigate data longer than the 180-day period that we give you in the admin console. So this allows you to retain your data for as long as you need, and it's really useful to compare usage year on year, for example, or carry out an investigation that something happened 2 years ago. You can't do that in the admin console, but you can do that from here. And you can see things like the number of bytes that you're going to be used or are being used, and how many rows are being streamed on a regular basis. So I think I've got 976 million rows of data in this data set from the last 5 years or so. You can also go through, and so as I said, if you like writing queries, you can do things like this. And so if you wanted to write a SQL query, I could go through and find all of my meeting recordings that have been done from all time. And I could go through and see who did them, how many times they've kind of been recorded. I might want to go through and do something like this that actually goes through and takes all the users, how many drive recordings they've made using Google Meet, and how many times these videos have been viewed. So really detailed insights you can go through and investigate on your data using SQL commands. So that's great. If you love SQL, you can have at it. All your data is there. But what we typically see is that it's better to go through and get up and running. So I'm going to go through and give you some Looker Studio dashboard templates. Let me just load this up now. And I'm going to share this in the chat, because this, I think, should be publicly accessible. And this gives us some public samples of things that you can get started. So once you've got this BigQuery export set up and you've got these activity, usage and drive inventory tables, what we have here is a number of Looker Studio dashboards that are really useful for you to go through and get a quick visual insight of your data. So if I wanted to maybe go through and get Google Classroom activity usage, for example, we have this publicly available Looker Studio dashboard that utilizes the activity and the usage table. So if I'm an administrator, for example, I can go through and get all this information about how Classroom is being used across my domain. I can go through and see how my teachers are using this, how my students are using this. This is using just some dummy data. And if I'm ready to use this for my data, I would simply go through. I would choose to make a copy of this data up here. And then I would go through and choose the activity and the usage tables. And so if you're unsure which ones to do, for each of these, it tells you which data sources you need. And so here, because I'm choosing the Classroom activity, it tells me the data sources I need to make a copy of is the activity and then the usage tables within Looker Studio. So I could go through, copy that report, and that is going to generate a template of this using my individual data. And that might take just a few moments to load. But just to reiterate, so this was the Classroom activity report from the public template. And now I've made a copy of this. You should see that when this loads.
And nice to see it's had an update recently. So now I've got Gemini, class tools in there as well.
Yeah, we added that really recently.
Yeah, nice.
And so now I've got the same dashboard, but this time it's using my own data. One other really useful thing is for any of these data sets, you can actually go through and unlike the standard investigation tool, every piece of activity related to a user in the BigQuery export also includes the organization unit that they're attributed to. So this is really useful if you want to go through and filter your reports just at the OU level. So if you want to see a specific year group, or maybe just investigate one or two schools within your group of schools, you can go through and do that really easily from any of these BigQuery dashboards. So there's lots of different options here. So if I wanted to go through and have a look at maybe just the drive inventory as an example. So this was, I can't remember who was asking this, maybe Mohammed.
I think it was Eisen had a
Eisen.
question. So, yeah.
So this is an example where I'm using the drive inventory and it's gone through, and this gives me an overview of all of the elements that are happening. And you'll see it includes information like the size, for example, and you can go through and make a copy of this dashboard and then go through and do whatever you need to. It's also really interesting just to explore the drive inventory back in the BigQuery project. So if you wanted to go through and get some information into this and the schema, you'll see you've got all of this information like the size, bytes, the permissions, etc. So you can go through and explore this. It's pretty rich. You can go through and see for every file when it was created, when it was end, when it was last read, all this information that you would typically have to use GAM for to go through and export, and it would run. It would take a long time to run, but you've got all this information like the permissions, org unit data, etc. of ownership, but very powerful tool and feature, which you can then obviously go through and get some investigation on here as well. What's really nice is you can go through and see all the files, for example, and the storage that have been externally shared, so shared with anyone with a link can view. So very useful. All of this information, so when I go through and choose to make a copy, you'll see that I go through and I can choose a data source. Now, there are two ways of doing this. You could either go through and create a data source at the point of copying. And when you do this, you are then chosen to, you've obviously got Google Sheets that you might be familiar with, but at this point, you would then go through, choose BigQuery, you would choose the project, you would choose the data set, and then you would choose which table that you want. So in this case, if I wanted to bring my own drive inventory, I would go through and do this and then connect. So that is one way of doing it. You can do that at the point of creation. What's interesting to know is that when you create this connector, it gets added to your Looker Studio table as a data set that you can then reuse in all of your other projects. So you could go through, configure this, add to the report. That's then going to do it this way, and make a copy of that report. One thing I will show you while that's loading is that in your Looker Studio dashboard, you'll see that you have all of your reports. Let me just switch over to my Looker Studio. So in lookerstudio.google.com, there we are. You'll see that you can see all of your reports plus your data sources. So you can either create data sources dynamically as you go, but it's often good practice to go through and create your 3 data sources in Looker Studio so that you can dynamically add them to any profile as you go. I think that's pretty much how to get started. We have a couple of, and we can share this slide deck with you all afterwards, but this is some example architecture that we'll typically go through. So if you're brand new to this, we can work with you, and you've got a wonderful team. Peter and the AppsEDU team can support you through here as well. The way that we typically get started from a version 1 would be that you take your data sources and you would use the BigQuery export to get those into BigQuery, and then we have Looker Studio is what you would use to analyze it. This is what we've just kind of covered today. So this is the basic flow where you take your data, export to BigQuery, and then use Looker Studio. This is what we call the crawl section. Yeah, as in there is the drive report template. So there is that dashboard that I just shared with you there. If you want something more to that, then just let me know and we can go through and show you some of those. Then there is Looker Studio Pro, which gives you a bit more functionality, and there are third-party visualization tools. You might be familiar with things like Power BI, which are allowed. It's not a swear word here, but there are other data visualization tools available that you can then go through and utilize. BigQuery is a pretty standardized tool that most third parties will integrate and build off. But then we also think about what other third-party data do you have? Is it learning management system data? Do you have an attendance record? Any of these data? And then do you want to also get those provisioned into BigQuery as well? And there are a number of ways of which you can do that. There is obviously an API for BigQuery that you can go through and choose to dynamically use an API from your third-party LMS system and get that data piped into BigQuery as well. You may even find if you reach out to your SIS or learning management provider, they have their own BigQuery export tool that you could go through and make use of. And then I'll just very quickly finish with a couple of like case studies. This dashboard, I think we can share, Peter, afterwards as well. But there's a really great Parramatta Catalytic Diocese in Australia. We have a full case study of this. They made a really good use case of predictive analytics for high school outcomes, and they got to about 93% accuracy over 5 years, working with one of our external consultants called Dr. Raju. But there's a really good case study we can share with you from here as well, where they use a feature list, the input variables, they establish what the importance was to go through from grade prediction, and then would actually build an algorithm to go through and make predictions as well. We have a number of kind of organizations who will then go through and provide these dashboards for school leaders, for example, and it's useful to then start thinking about what other data could you bring in to complement the existing workspace usage that you see here as well. So grades data, sometimes we end up seeing student well-being, Google Forms, for example, and feeding that data for live snapshots. Parent experiences, feeding that data in and linking that across to individual schools to spot dynamic trends of, hey, are parents more satisfied with this school versus this other school in my organization? Other useful things is exit surveys for students and teachers, and thinking about how you can amalgamate all that data. And it's even easier now to start using Gemini within BigQuery to get automatic insights for your data. So once it's in BigQuery, you can then query that using Gemini in natural language and get some pretty interesting insights and uncover new features from here as well. We've also done some work with Malaysia. They have a huge device deployment for not just Chromebooks, but giving a really nice insight, and you can include like the IP address location from the login, log out events, for example, to track usage across the country. So if you're a group of schools across a country, it might be useful for you to then go through and get deeper tracked insights from here as well. And again, we worked with Malaysia to build out some of the school level dashboards for read along, which was really, really useful to help them drive some of these features and improve literacy outcomes.
If you're managing IT in education, then please do check out our playlist for more Google IT admin videos. But when it comes to keeping your school safe and secure, videos aren't always enough. Our security audit and remote admin services enables you and your IT teams to focus on what matters most. This service includes a direct chat space with us, where you can ask questions about Google Workspace and get our expert advice and guidance, particularly on priority issues. We're always happy to jump on a Google Meet and help you resolve that problem. Our service also includes a full, comprehensive security audit every year, ensuring your domain is safe and secure and free from cyber threats. So if you want more details and would like to get started, then please do click on the link in the video description now. Thanks for watching.